Okay, now, Mark, your book, Collateral Damage, is just published now, tying together the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, and JFK. And you say that the kingpin in all this, or the linchpin, or the central element here, was Robert F. Kennedy. Now, what was that all about?
Well, I'll explain that to you. I was going to quit, actually, Larry. I felt like that I had, really done all I could with regard to the JFK assassination, all of that. And so I was going to quit. But my supporters around the country and around the world, there's more than almost 2 million views of my presentations and interviews about those books that I just mentioned. And so I was going to really quit. I just thought there, nothing more for Mark, but so many supporters and readers sent me emails and said, is there a connection between the deaths of Dorothy Kilgallen and Marilyn Monroe? And it got me to thinking, because I don't know if you've thought about this, but these three people died within 40 months of each other. Marilyn died in August 1962, then JFK November 65, then Dorothy JFK November 63, then Dorothy November 65. Right. So I decided to start looking into that, and it led me in a very interesting direction, because I'd always wondered about whether Marilyn Monroe, and for your audience, if they don't know, the verdict with regard to her death was that she committed suicide. There was a huge headline in the New York Daily Mirror I have in the book, Marilyn kills self, and all of that. And so I pretty much bought all that, like most people probably did, and didn't think too much about it with the other events going on in the world at that time. But as I started to look into it, the first thing I came across was a article written by Dorothy Kilgallen just 2 days before Marilyn died, and it's in the book. Mm-hmm. And basically she said, Marilyn's on the upswing. She's doing great. She's going to Hollywood parties. She's back online with a movie she's making. And she's cooking, I think were the words that Marilyn or Dorothy used, in the sexual appeal department, because she's involved with a gentleman who is a bigger name than even Joe DiMaggio. And people may remember that's the baseball player that she was married to. That was marriage number 2 for Marilyn. And so it got me to wondering that this doesn't sound like a woman who would commit suicide. And so, like any investigative reporter with a brain, I decided to probe further. And the first thing that I looked at, just as I had done in the Dorothy Kilgallen death, she died in 1965, and we can talk about the mysterious elements of that. I looked at the autopsy and the certificate of death, and right away I noticed that at 10:30 in the morning, the day after Marilyn died, they had diagnosed her death as an overdose of drugs. 6 hours later in the certificate of death, it said suicide. So I really wondered what was going on there, and that made me really question what had happened. And then Dorothy came to my aid again, as she has done so many times with my investigations of the JFK assassination, her life and times and death and all of that, because she led me, I really truly believe this, she led me to an article that she wrote where she posed, and it's in the book, Collateral Damage, several questions about Marilyn's death. She asked, why was the light on in Marilyn's bedroom when she died? She slept in the dark. Why was she found in the nude? Well, she never slept in the nude. Why wasn't, if she ingested this 40 to 50 barbiturates that supposedly she had taken, where's the glass where she would have had the water to have drank to have ingested the barbiturates, and several other questions about it. And so that got me to asking more questions about what may have happened. And I decided to look, as I always do in any of my investigations, at motive. If Marilyn did not commit suicide, and let's say that there was a homicide here, that she was killed, well, why would that have happened? And so I started to think about, let's just look into who she was involved in right before she died. And that led me to looking at, there could have been several possibilities in terms of suspects. The FBI might have wanted to get rid of her, or the CIA, or the mafia, or whatever. And I looked into those possibilities, couldn't find much. And then I thought, well, who's this handsome gentleman that was in her life, who's even more a big name than Joe DiMaggio, and I started looking at the Kennedys. You may remember, and I think we all do, that the rumors, or whether they were fact or not, was that Marilyn had had an affair with John F. Kennedy. And that had happened supposedly in May of 1962, right after she sang Happy Birthday to him at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, and there's a photo in my book. It's the only one that was ever taken of the three together. Bobby Kennedy is on the left, Marilyn's in the middle in this sequin dress, almost see-through dress, and then John Kennedy's on the right. And so I got to wondering, well, handsome gentleman, bigger name, John Kennedy. So I looked at that and investigated it, but I found right away that that was not going to be the guy I needed to look into, because that love affair was very short-lived, if at all, frankly, any sexual relationship or whatever, and I think there was one, but it was very short-lived because Joe Kennedy told JFK, and his sons always listened to him, they were scared to death of him, that if JFK was going to run for re-election, he didn't need his name being associated with a sexual, a sexual object in Hollywood in Maryland, and so he told JFK to stop that, and he did. Well, that led me to thinking, what about Robert Kennedy? And that was the aha moment that triggered my writing Collateral Damage, because as I started to look into him, I found out, first of all, a bombshell letter from Jean Kennedy Smith, who was actually, the sister of both John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and it was to Marilyn. And I'll paraphrase it a little bit, but basically it's in the book, and what it said was, I understand that you and Bobby are the new item, ! When he comes back east, we all think you should come with him. So that really got me to thinking, wait a minute, something was really going on here with Robert Kennedy and Marilyn, and then I found a document that changed everything. And I had tried to find this document before because I had heard that it connected JFK, Marilyn, and Dorothy. It was a CIA document, and actually the date on the one that I found was August 3rd, 1962, just one day before Marilyn died. And it's in the book. I won't read it all, but basically the first thing that it did was connect. It was based on a wiretap conversation between Dorothy Kilgallen and an individual that she trusted in New York, and basically Dorothy talked about the fact that that Dorothy had an obsession with UFOs, and in fact she had gone to a UFO convention in England the year before and wrote articles about it, and I have those in the book as well, because she was fascinated with UFOs and she really believed they existed. But this CIA document showed that JFK also had an obsession with UFOs, and so did Marilyn. And it said that in this document that apparently JFK had told Marilyn, either pillow talk or whatever it was, that he was going to really launch an investigation into Area 51, I think it's in New Mexico, and all of that with regard to UFOs, because he believed that they existed. And then the next two lines in there, Larry, just were bombshells. It said that Marilyn had it with the Kennedys, that basically she was tired of being used like a piece of meat and thrown away by first John Kennedy and then Bobby Kennedy, and that she'd had it, and that also she was going to take that to the media and go forward with talking about the love affairs, as well as, for instance, John F. Kennedy's intention to have Fidel Castro killed, matters of national security that they must have either told her as trying to impress her or whatever that way. And the bottom half of that document then talked about this torrid love affair that Marilyn had with Bobby Kennedy, and the fact that it had gone on for several months, and that Bobby Kennedy had even promised Marilyn that he would divorce Ethel and marry her. And so that really tied everything together and made me realize that, like you said, Bobby Kennedy was in the middle of all of this. He obviously fell madly in love with Marilyn Monroe, even to the extent of telling her he was going to divorce Ethel, and then he dumped her, just like our JFK had done, and she had had enough. And as one witness that I have in the book, a reliable witness, told me, when Marilyn said that she was going to the media with these matters of national security and the love affairs, she was dead, and she died a couple days later.
All right, Mark, this is the Rothberg report that you're referring to. It was an FBI wiretap? And
CIA. I thought it was FBI to begin with, and that's in the book, but I've later found out it was a CIA document, and Rothberg was Kilgallen's friend in New York. And
the wiretap conversation, which was laid out in the report, was that JFK had told her about UFOs, and he was thinking of making that public.
Yeah, and I found another document that's in the book that confirms that. I had to watch using it till I could confirm its authenticity, but there's no question that for whatever reason, JFK had this obsession with UFOs, and that he was going to launch this investigation. And I'm sure that if Joe Kennedy was worried about JFK and the possibility the media would find out about his love affair with Marilyn, he must have been as angry as he possibly could that there could be some sort of an article written where JFK was believing in UFOs, because at that time, I think things have changed now, but at that time they would have thought JFK had lost his mind.
In fact, didn't they mention the president's visit to an Air Force base or some part where there was UFO sightings?
Yeah, they did, and I've never been able to quite confirm that happened. So I'm very careful. I don't speculate in the book, but that was in the document as well. And it was just amazing to read it because I just realized that the person with the most motive to have killed, to have silenced Marilyn Monroe was obviously Bobby Kennedy. And so then I decided to find out where was Bobby Kennedy on the day that Marilyn died. Now I realize that he probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger or infected her body with barbiturates himself, but where was he? And so I found that he had told, he had said that he was in San Francisco at a law conference he was speaking at, and therefore wasn't in Los Angeles. And it wasn't very long until I absolutely destroyed that alibi. In the book, I provide the fact that not only were there witnesses that saw him, including a Beverly Hills police officer who was the most decorated at the time, who stopped a vehicle at midnight after Marilyn had died, and Peter Lawford was driving, and there was Bobby in the back seat, and in the front seat was Kilgallen's psychiatrist Greenson. And all of that, I found that the police chief in Los Angeles said that, yes, Bobby was, in L.A. They knew it. They always knew when he was in town on that day. And so there was all those kind of things. And then the real uncontroverted...
Mark, excuse me. Let me interrupt you. It was Kilgallen's psychiatrist or Marilyn's psychiatrist?
Marilyn's psychiatrist. I'm sorry. Marilyn's psychiatrist, yes.
Uh-huh.
And then what I found was, you hope as a researcher and a historian, which I am, to find something that just can't be, objected to because there's no reason why it would be false. And that was a 20th Century Fox Studios ledger. And I'll read it to you. Before 11 a.m. on August 4th, 1962, remember that's the day Marilyn died, a helicopter landed at the 20th Century Fox Studios helipad near Stage 14. Studio publicist Frank Neal, working that Saturday morning, said he saw Robert Kennedy jump out of the helicopter and rush to a gray limousine waiting nearby. Neal said he got a glimpse of movie star Peter Lawford, brother-in-law to the Kennedys, sitting inside. So obviously, that told me that Bobby was in L.A. on the day that Marilyn died. And what I found out then was that he and Peter Lawford had gone to Marilyn's home and begged her not to go to the media. And unfortunately, she said, I've had it with you guys, and I'm going to do that. And so what I am able to show in the book is that there is a very plausible way that using operatives wherever he found them, and with all the power and money the Kennedys had, that wouldn't have been hard. But those operatives then went to Marilyn's home later that evening and were responsible for the overdose of drugs that she took, the barbiturates, which amounted to a homicide. And Bobby was very, go ahead. Yeah, to a homicide.
Let's examine the flaws in the investigation of her death. Cause of death. Now, initially, Mark, that was listed as accidental overdose and later changed to suicide?
Yes, in just a few hours. And so how that happened is very convenient for Bobby. First of all, the medical examiner in Los Angeles, Dr. Curfey, decided not to handle the autopsy. Just as happened in Dorothy Kilgallen's death, there was a junior medical examiner who handled it by the name of Thomas Noguchi. And so he handled the autopsy, and it's in the book, you can look at it, and there were several clues in there for me that this was not an accidental overdose, that obviously she was killed, but we can get to that in a little bit.
Initially, Mark, it was accidental overdose and circumstances undetermined.
No, that's Dorothy Kilgallen.
Right.
That's not Marilyn. That's Dorothy Kilgallen.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easy to mix them up. And basically what I'm going to say to you is there was no investigation of Marilyn's death, just like there wasn't of Dorothy's. So what happened here is that there was that autopsy, and the autopsy report I had. But within days of the autopsy being released as being authentic, Thomas Noguchi said he made mistakes. He said, there were some of her internal organs, Marilyn's, that I forgot to examine. And by the time I realized that, those organs had been destroyed. I mean, can you imagine that? That wouldn't happen if there was Joan Doe who died, let alone Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
And then on top of that,
I was going to say that's similar to how JFK's brain disappeared after.
Well, in the book, I don't know if you know who Dr. Cyril Wecht is, but he's probably one of the best, forensic scientists, and he just destroys the JFK autopsy, Marilyn's autopsy, and Dorothy's autopsy in the book. But Bobby was so fortunate because he had a very good friend, and that very good friend was William Parker, the police chief of Los Angeles. So instead of going back to the death scene and investigating, instead of talking to Marilyn's friends and finding out that she wasn't in a bad mental state, instead of even looking into all of the aspects of a normal investigation, he appointed 3 psychiatrists to examine the documents and a few other things about Marilyn's mental state just before she died. And predictably, for Bobby's sake, he came back, the result came back that she was suicidal. End of the story. There was no investigation of any kind after that. And some people have said to me, well, why not? Why wasn't there? Why weren't more people disturbed by what happened to Marilyn? And I think it was a combination of the same sort of thing that happened with the JFK assassination, when people believed the ludicrous Oswald alone theory that J. Edgar Hoover was shouting to the world. In this situation, they just thought, hey, she's another celebrity, she's this, sex symbol and all that, and she probably just killed herself, and so there was no investigation. And also it was interesting to me, and I didn't think about this until recently, but Dorothy obviously had, investigated Marilyn's death to a point, but she didn't go any further, and there wasn't any further investigation by anybody of Marilyn's death. But just, this was August, September went by, and then in October was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Mm-hmm. And I think that Marilyn's death got lost in all of that. It was a very, telling point in our history. We thought we might have a nuclear war and everything. And so there was no investigation any further into Marilyn's death. So one of the connections that I make is that, JFK, Dorothy, and Marilyn were all denied justice, no investigation of any kind. And there's no question in my mind, as I said in the book, that if Bobby would have been prosecuted for Marilyn's death in 1962, based on all of the evidence that I uncovered, then for sure he would have been powerless. He would have had to have resigned and defended himself and everything, Larry. And so that what would that have done? Well, that would have alleviated the situation where those in the mafia, Marcello and the others, had to kill JFK to render Bobby powerless, which is exactly what happened. They wouldn't have had to have done that. Therefore, there would have been no JFK assassination, and you can stretch it out even further that Dorothy Kilgallen would not have been killed in 1965 because she would not have investigated the JFK assassination. There would have been none, and therefore she wouldn't have been a threat to those people who would have believed that she would have exposed the truth about what happened. So it stretches out there and everything. And basically then what you have is the actions of Bobby Kennedy, the abuse of power in 1961 and 62, caused collateral damage, which was the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, and JFK.
But Mark, my question would be this, concerning JFK's assassination. Even if RFK had been prosecuted, the deep state or the military-industrial complex at the time, whatever you want to call it, they had it in for JFK anyway because his threats to pull out of Vietnam, his alleged softness on communism, which would have jeopardized the profit-making from the Cold War and other offenses where he was not part of the club. So would that in itself not have resulted in his assassination, regardless of whether his brother had been prosecuted?
Well, it's a very good point, and I should rephrase a little bit. JFK, I don't believe, would have been assassinated in November 1963. Now, looking at motive, who benefited from JFK's death? Well, certainly those that you just mentioned, all would have benefited by JFK's death. So would have Lyndon Johnson, who have the greatest benefit from the crime because he became president. The CIA, the FBI, the Cubans. I mean, there are all these possibles out there, but I'm going to buy what I believe Dorothy Kilgallen, the most credible reporter. She was at the Ruby trial. She's the only one that interviewed Jack Ruby, all of that, what she believed. And right after she interviewed Jack Ruby, the first place she went was to New Orleans, where Carlos Marcello was. She had connected him, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Jack Ruby. And so motive-wise, there's no question that Marcello benefited because he was either going to prison or going to be deported again, and he couldn't let that happen. And so with JFK being dead, Bobby was powerless, and Marcello celebrated into the night because he was free from Bobby's wrath.
Well, let's examine some of the discrepancies in the so-called death scene report, the stuff that was not investigated, including a fresh bruise on Marilyn's hip, mentioned but dismissed largely in the autopsy report. Chloral hydrate and Nembutal in the bloodstream, and you say there's evidence that it was actually inserted rectally.
Yeah. So what I tried to do, and I want people. My books are stop and think books. I want people to look at my facts and conclusions and make up their own mind. But a real clue, Larry, was that there were no needle marks on Marilyn's body. At least Noguchi said there wasn't, although he screwed up the rest of the autopsy, so who knows. But I got to thinking, here's some clues out there. And in the autopsy, it talked about this fresh bruise. And so I said to myself, well, how did that happen? It could have happened in a lot of ways, but let's just think about that a minute. And then that this chloral hydrate and Nembutal were somehow or another in her bloodstream. So how did they get there? And then the real clue was the fact that when the first detective was there, he saw that Eunice Murray, Marilyn's housekeeper, was doing the laundry. She was standing in front of the washing machine, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, this might all make sense because if you look at it in a logical way, let's say that those operatives of Robert Kennedy's come to Marilyn's home. They surprise her in the middle of the night. They render her not unconscious, but basically, maybe chloroform or whatever to make her a little shaky. And so then she's carried to the bedroom. And let's say that on the way there, somehow or another, maybe a hall, stool or something like that, or when she gets to the door, they hit the door. Hey, how about that phrase, fresh bruise? Maybe that's what happened there. And then you look at the fact that, if in fact the drugs were not ingested by her, but perhaps rectally, then she's in the bed or on the floor or something, and there's some soilage of some sort, and so the sheets and things like that are soiled, and so, well, what has to happen then? Well, they have to be washed. And so there you have Eunice Murray in front of the washing machine. So there's a lot of different theories probably as to what could have happened, and I respect all of them. But I think that that's at least a plausible way that Marilyn died that evening.
Chloral hydrate, by the way, is very dangerous if too much is taken, and not so much with Nembutal, but chloral hydrate. To this day, doctors and pharmacists are very careful about the strength of a prescription for that.
Am I picking the right drug, Larry? That in some states that's used for executions.
I don't know, Mark.
Executions. I think there's something like that I put in one of my previous books, and I believe it can be. But the combination of those drugs too would really make a difference. And so, I came up with that plausible explanation, and we'll see what people think. So far, there seems to be a lot of support for that idea.
Yeah, and also you mentioned before in a previous book how Dorothy Kilgallen had stated before her death that she was going to blow the cover off of this whole thing with the JFK assassination. Perhaps she was also referring to the UFOs, but she made a point of that she was onto a huge story and was going to shake Washington. And after that, she died.
Yes, and again, all these possibilities are there in terms of who terminated JFK's life. But after interviewing Jack Ruby and exposing his testimony before the Warren Commission, she was the only one to do that. She went to New Orleans. She stayed there. She took her hairdresser with her, as she would, to always look good. She sent him back to New York and said, "Get out of here, go back to New York, and don't tell anybody you came with me." When she got to New York, she made the same mistake that Marilyn did when Marilyn said she was going to go to the media about the Kennedys. Dorothy said, "I'm going to crack the JFK assassination wide open." She told that to several people. She told one of her hairdressers, "If the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination, it would cost me my life. I'm afraid for my life and my family. I bought a gun." And so Dorothy knew that she could be a target because she was dealing with powerful men. And this book she was writing for Random House, would expose all that. And then she was shortly dead thereafter. And as you remember, she was found in a bedroom she never slept in a bed she didn't sleep in, with her eyelashes, hairpiece, and false eyelashes and hairpiece on. There was an empty bottle of Seconal on a side table, and right away when the police came, 3 or 4 hours later, after her body was found, and maybe even more, they thought, hey, here's another celebrity who overdosed on drugs. And so the official verdict there, as you mentioned before, was overdose of drugs and alcohol, circumstances undetermined. And it's really interesting. I think you'll find that I noticed finally that one of the names on the autopsy was Dr. Michael Baden, the famous forensic guy. And so I was on a radio show in New York City, and he was too. So I said, Dr. Baden, I've been looking more into Dorothy Kilgallen's death, and your name is on the autopsy. Well, that scared him to death. And I said, this whole thing with regard to circumstances undetermined, I just don't understand that, because basically what happened then, the media was told that she overdosed on drugs, and he quickly said, well, circumstances undetermined, Mark, basically we didn't know what had happened. And that was just shocking, and I put that in the book because, when the headline "Marilyn Kills Self" was out there, that was it for her. Her reputation was destroyed. Same with Dorothy. It looked like she was a druggie, and a drug addict or something like that. And so I've been fighting as much as I can as their voices to try to, get these verdicts overturned so that both of them can get those reputations restored.
Yeah, wasn't Thomas Noguchi also the medical examiner in the Robert Kennedy assassination?
I don't think so, but it is possible. He certainly handled Michael Jackson and Robert Wagner's wife, the actress Natalie Wood.
Right.
I think he was in the O.J. case. He was in a lot of them. So it's very possible, but I don't recall that one.
Now, in terms of getting officials to do something about this, you recently addressed a letter to Mr. George Gascon, the Los Angeles DA, asking him to reopen the case and detailing the reasons why. I know before I asked the question, you haven't gotten a response from him yet, I imagine.
No, and it's a struggle with these things, with so many things going on in life. In our world, I sent him a letter. I sent him the Collateral Damage, the book. I sent him 300 pages from the book, the evidence about what I just told you about Marilyn's death, and I asked him to reinvestigate Marilyn's death. I have not heard from him yet. I want to let a little time go by, and I'll contact him and see what I can do. I have made, or I thought I had made, some progress with Dorothy's death because about 2 months ago, Detective Philip Panzarella of the NYPD Cold Case Squad got in touch with me. I didn't get in touch with him and said he was going to look into Dorothy's death. So I presented him with The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, the book, an evidence report, all the things that I have, and was assured that he was going to go forward with this. But again, I've asked him several times what the status is of the investigation, and so far I haven't heard from him. So it's an uphill battle, Larry, but I'm going to keep trying.
And previous to that, you had contacted the police commissioner in New York asking him to investigate his superior, and I'm correct?
Yeah, and that cost me a trip to New York because I've been on a radio show in New York, and the gentleman, John Casamedades, who is the host of that show, is a good friend of Dermot Shea, the New York police commissioner. And so through his colleague, I bought a ticket to a police athletic league's luncheon where Dermot Shea was the speaker. And so I got there, and he was the speaker, and so I asked a question about Dorothy Kilgallen's death and whether they were going to investigate those kind of things. And he said, well, yes, we will, Mark, and I think I have gotten a letter from you. Why don't we talk after I'm done with my speech? And so I went up to the front, and well, first of all, we had shaken hands earlier. My friend there had introduced me to him and shook hands and smiled and had a picture of him. I have the picture in the book. And so we were real buddies, and so then I went up there and I said, I really appreciate your looking into this. And he said yes, and gave me a card of a detective standing next to him and said, this detective will work with you, Mark. And so when I got back to California, I sent this man 4, 5, 6 emails. I called him, and I never heard from him.
Mark, this stonewalling is typical of what we've had for the past 50 years or so. Do you really expect, despite the publicity generated by your latest book and previous books, and despite the continuing public interest in these deaths, do you really think the officials are going to finally come clean, or at least have a genuine investigation?
By my writing desk, there is this quote: "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is the duty of the living to do so for them." So I took on the voice of Dorothy, and I've taken on the voice of Marilyn, and I'll keep shouting with this. I think in a previous conversation we had, I told you that there's a YouTube video of me up there speaking at the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco. That I think by yesterday there were more than 55,000 views of that on YouTube in just a couple weeks. And I'm going to now give another speech in Dallas, Texas on the 8th of July. And so I'll just keep shouting. And, you just never know. What it takes is pressure by people other than me. And so I just hope that at some point somebody will either watch one of the videos or they'll listen to a radio interview like yours or whatever, and they'll say, I'm gonna see if I can't get behind this and do something, because these women were celebrities, but even if they weren't celebrities, it doesn't matter. They were victims of homicides. There's no question about that, based on motive and all the evidence I found. so they deserve justice. And I don't care if they were murdered 55 years ago or whatever it is, or last week. They deserve justice, and neither one have gotten it. So I'm just going to keep shouting, Larry, and maybe someday somebody will listen to me. The other thing I think I mentioned to you that I'm very proud of is that all of my body of work now will be part of my alma mater, Purdue University's archives. They made a deal for me to give them all of the material, including all of my books, research books, notes, my television career, my criminal defense lawyer days, all of that. And so as of the fall, the Ruby trial transcripts, everything that I've put in all the books and everything will be available for the public. And I'm very honored with that, because the only other two people honored by Purdue have been Amelia Earhart and Neil Armstrong. And so I'm hoping, I put that in the book, Collateral Damage, and people will read that, and hopefully they'll look into that, and maybe one of these days there'll be somebody who just decides, hey, I'm really going to go after this, and I'm not going to quit until I get, a real investigation into both of those deaths, and I'll be right beside them shouting as loud as I can.
Mark, one of the things that struck me about your research into these women is that, they were both perhaps underrated, underappreciated, especially Marilyn Monroe, who was depicted by Hollywood at least, as a dumb blonde, the sex item, and nothing in depth. But you presented some of her writings that really amazed me how sensitive it was to people in relationships and the real meaning of love. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was interesting. Dorothy Kilgallen had written a column about Marilyn and Marilyn seeking love and all of that, and so I found that, and that's in the book. But the real key was finding a book called Fragments, which includes Marilyn's writings in hotel rooms and, where she was waiting on appointments and different things. Some of them are on the back of hotel stationery, whatever. But there were poems in there, and her writings and all of that kind of thing. And there's a real sensitivity to her. She wasn't a dumb blonde. She was a lot more intellectual than people thought. Of course, she was married to Arthur Miller, who was the supreme intellectual, the author and all of that. But, I found out that she read, Walt Whitman, and she read, for God's sakes, Ulysses, which I tried to read and gave up after 2 pages. So she was a very bright individual, and as was Dorothy Kilgallen with her superb writing skills. And so at the end of the book, not only did I present the writings, but I tried to humanize each one of them, and what they lost and what we lost. And with the 3 subjects, JFK was never able to play with John, and Caroline when they grew up. Couldn't go to any events with them or anything. Dorothy Kilgallen, the mother of 3, never was able to play with her 3 children or see them grow up. And Marilyn, the only thing that she wanted near the end of her life was to have a child. And she hoped to remarry Joe DiMaggio after she got out of the web of the Kennedys, and that didn't happen. So that's what they lost. But the world lost one of the greatest entertainers that we've ever had, Marilyn Monroe. If you just watch some of her films, she's just electric when she's on the screen. We lost JFK. Who knows what he would have done as president in the future? And Dorothy Kilgallen, not only her starring on What's My Line, what that would have been about, but all of the investigations that she would have conducted, we lost those as well. So we lost 3 remarkable, inspiring people when they died within 20 months or 40 months of each other in 1962, 1963, and 1965.
Yeah, in fact, with Dorothy Kilgallen, you pointed out in a previous book concerning her that, most people, the younger generation, and even my generation, who was around at the time when What's My Line was current, we considered her, a columnist, a gossip columnist, and a TV star of What's My Line, but she was much more than that. You say that she was the best investigative reporter of her time.
Oh, no question about it. And oh boy, Larry, how many readers and people around the world have said, boy, I wish we had reporters like Dorothy Kilgallen today, the integrity that she had. There's a photograph of her on, and I should mention the website, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org that I created for everything about Dorothy, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. And there's a photograph, my favorite one. She's standing in the middle of the courtroom at the Dr. Sam Shepard case. You'll see that all the other reporters are surrounding her, the respect that they had for her. She was a woman of integrity and a reporter of integrity, and people are right. I wish we had more like Dorothy Kilgallen today.
And those were the days when female reporters were not necessarily respected, taken seriously, or even given access to some of the newsmakers of the day. But she was a pioneer in that respect.
Well, she was, and both Marilyn and Dorothy, there's about 50-some similarities that I found that are in the book between the two women, their life and times and their deaths. But both of them overcame gender discrimination. Dorothy was a college dropout, and in that day and age, women weren't supposed to ride in the back of the car. They were supposed to ride in the car behind. And so she overcame all of that gender discrimination to become, as I said, the most powerful female voice in America. And look what Marilyn had to go through. I mean, you can just imagine with her looks and sex appeal and everything, trying to get ahead, trying to go ahead and somehow or another achieve the stardom that she wanted. It must have been very, very difficult for her all the time. But both women achieved great success in their respective careers.
Mark Shaw, author of Collateral Damage, just his latest book on the investigations into some very suspicious and pivotal deaths that changed the course of this nation's history. Thanks for being with us once again, Mark Shaw.
Thank you so much, Larry.